If someone had told her that her wedding day would begin with hope and end in humiliation, Aurora Montenegro might have laughed gently, brushing the thought away like a stray hair on her cheek. After all, today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. And yet, somewhere deep inside her, a quiet ache had been trying to warn her all along. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of the modest bridal suite, casting golden rays over her simple white gown. It wasn't designer, nor adorned with crystals or lace imported from Europe, but it was hers, stitched with love by the seamstress from the town where she had grown up, and it carried with it more meaning than any luxury ever could. Aurora sat in front of the mirror, smoothing the satin over her lap with trembling hands. Her reflection looked calm, but her chest betrayed her, rising and falling with every breath that held 1,000 unspoken truths. The stylist pinned the final strand of her dark brown hair into a delicate chignon, and a soft knock came from the door. 5 minutes, Miss Montenegro. Someone called gently from the hallway. She whispered quiet, "Thank you," but her voice caught slightly. It wasn't nerves, not entirely. It was memory. Childhood moments clawed their way to the surface. Rain dripping through a leaky roof. Nights spent listening to her mother cry herself to sleep. Days without school because they couldn't afford the shoes. Aurora had clawed her way through it all with grace, never asking for pity, never expecting more than what she earned. Even now, Nicholas didn't know everything. She had never told him the whole story. She hadn't told him about the identity she'd left behind, about the wealth she had once turned her back on, about the last name that still made headlines on the other side of the world. She had wanted to be loved for who she was, not for who the world thought she should be. Nicholas Delgado had been her calm in the storm, or so she believed. The music began. Aurora stood, her heart tightening as she stepped out into the hallway, bouquet clutched tightly. Every step toward the ceremony felt heavier than the last. The aisle looked impossibly long. Her eyes searched for Nicholas at the altar, and when she saw him, something inside her trembled, not from joy, but from the absence of it in his eyes. Then it happened. The whispers started before the vows. Subtle murmurs from the guests, side glances, discomfort. Nicholas stepped forward, his jaw tense, his hand not extended as she reached the altar. For a moment, time stopped. "Aurora," he said, voice low but sharp, "I can't marry you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her chest tightened. Her fingers froze around the bouquet. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you loved me. But I see it now," he continued, louder, eyes darting to his mother seated in the front row, lips pursed with satisfaction. "You were just after the Delgado name, the fortune. You played innocent, but you had a plan all along, didn't you?" Aurora's world blurred. Pain didn't come in shouts or sobs. It came in silence, in the stillness of a heart breaking, so completely it forgot how to beat. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply lowered the bouquet slowly, letting her arms fall to her sides. Whispers turned to full-on murmurs. Cameras flashed. Someone in the second row let out a scandalized laugh. But Aurora stood still, her spine straight, eyes locked on a man who once promised her forever. He was not the man she thought he was. With quiet grace, she turned away. No rush, no drama, just a woman reclaiming her dignity step by step, while the world watched. She exited the garden where the ceremony was held, walking through petals that had once meant joy but now scattered like fragments of a broken promise. The wind lifted her veil as if trying to take it away, as if it, too, wanted to release her from the lies she had almost lived. Hours passed. The bridal suite was empty now, stripped of laughter and champagne flutes. Aurora sat by the window, still in her dress. No one had come after her, and she hadn't expected them to. She looked up at the moon rising above the city skyline. Its light touched her face softly, like a hand resting gently on a wound. She thought of the mother she hadn't seen in years, of the letters unopened in the drawer, of the legacy she had run from in search of something real. Maybe Nicholas had never been real. Maybe he had always been looking for something that matched the expectations set by his family, not by his heart. Aurora's fingers brushed the edge of the windowsill. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just Awake, she had offered her whole heart, unguarded, and he had tossed it aside at the first sign of pressure. That was a story to carry now, not hers. From her clutch bag, she pulled a small envelope. Inside it, a card, gold-trimmed, formal, the seal of the Montenegro family crest embossed in the corner. She traced a thumb over it slowly, then opened it. Inside were the words she had been dreading, and the ones that would change everything. Your inheritance is now fully transferred. As of tomorrow morning, you are the sole heir and active chairwoman of the Montenegro Foundation. We await your instruction. She exhaled long and slow. There was the name she had buried, the empire she had fled, the power she never wanted. And now it was back in her hands. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. Aurora stood, walking back to the mirror. Her reflection looked different now, older, wiser, and calmer. There were no tears, no rage, only clarity. Nicholas had shown her what love wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be the beginning of something far more honest. Because tomorrow, she wouldn't be the girl humiliated at the altar. Tomorrow, she would rise on her own terms, and the world would watch. The scent of lilies still lingered in her memory. It was the first thing she noticed the day Nicholas Delgado walked into the small flower shop where she worked. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, dressed in a suit that didn't quite match the atmosphere of the tiny downtown boutique. He looked out of place, too polished, too precise, but his eyes were tired, as if the weight of expectation had followed him through every doorway of his life. Aurora was arranging a bouquet of tulips and baby's breath when she looked up and met his gaze. "Do you do custom orders?" he asked, his voice low but pleasant. She nodded. "We do. Any specific flowers in mind?" He hesitated. "Something simple, nothing extravagant. My mother's birthday." That was the first lie she would later realize. He was there for someone else. A woman, maybe, or a date he wanted to impress. But in that moment, none of it mattered. She chose sunflowers and soft white roses, sunlight and grace, and tied them with a satin ribbon. "Simple can still be beautiful," she said softly as she handed them over. Nicholas smiled in a way that almost looked like relief. He came back a week later, and then again, and then, suddenly, she found herself waiting for the sound of the doorbell each morning like it meant something more than another customer. They talked in bits and pieces, weather, flowers, books. He never asked about her past, and she never offered it. And in that silence, a fragile connection was born. Nicholas seemed enchanted by her calmness. "You're different from the women I usually meet," he told her one rainy afternoon as she wrapped a bouquet in brown paper. "You don't seem to want anything from me." She looked up, startled. "Why would I?" He shrugged. "Most people want something. Status, money, a name, especially where I come from." That's when Aurora knew she could never tell him the truth. She had grown up with everything. Private schools, chauffeurs, summers in villas. But beneath all that, her world had been cold. Her parents believed in appearances more than affection. They had carved out a life of prestige and control. And when she dared to challenge it, when she chose passion over protocol, they shut her out completely. She left at 17. No contact, no help, no regrets. Starting over had been painful. She had learned how to stretch $20 across a week, how to mend shoes instead of replacing them, how to smile even when her stomach ached. The flower shop was the first place she had felt peace. Among petals and stems, she had found a sense of purpose again. And Nicholas, he made her believe she could have loved, too. But there was always a wall between them, one she had built with quiet precision. She feared what would happen if he ever discovered who she really was. Not just the name she had hidden, but the layers of abandonment, privilege, and guilt she carried beneath her gentle demeanor. Nicholas once asked, "Don't you ever want more than this? A bigger life?" She had smiled carefully. Not all big lives are good lives. He didn't understand. How could he? His world was built on legacy, on expectations passed down like heirlooms. His mother, Elena Delgado, was known across the city, a woman of poise and power. Aurora had never met someone who spoke so often of tradition and family honor. From the beginning, Aurora sensed the tension between Nicholas and his mother. He would mention her in half-bitter tones. "She want me to marry someone who knows which fork to use at dinner," he joked once. Someone with a pedigree. And yet, Aurora watched how her presence still dictated his actions. He flinched when Elena called. He dressed the way she approved. He hosted dinner parties he didn't enjoy, seated beside women chosen more for lineage than love. Despite it all, he kept coming back to Aurora. They spent afternoons walking the park, evenings curled on her small couch with cups of tea, and long nights sharing dreams they were too afraid to chase. Aurora never told him about the Montenegro legacy. She became addicted to the purity of their moments, the simplicity of being loved for her smile, not her surname. But Nicholas's cracks began to show. He grew more guarded, more critical of her modest apartment, her thrifted dresses, her unfamiliarity with certain wines or classical composers. At times, it felt like he was trying to fit her into a mold she hadn't agreed to. And slowly, he began to speak of her as if she were something to be fixed. "My mother says you're sweet," he told her one evening, voice hesitant, but maybe a little naive. "She thinks." Aurora cut him off gently. "I'm not trying to impress your mother. I know, but maybe you should." She said nothing then, but a coldness settled in her chest. That night, as she lay awake, she traced her fingers along the edge of a hidden photo in her drawer. Her childhood home, the sprawling estate that once belonged to the Montenegro family. Her family. She hadn't seen it in years, but its shadow still lived inside her. She could have told him everything. She could have revealed the truth and watched his world unravel. But she didn't want a love that only survived because she checked the right boxes. She wanted to be chosen for her heart. And somewhere deep down, she knew Nicholas hadn't truly seen it. Not yet. Not until it was far too late. The silence of the hotel room felt heavier than usual that night. Aurora stood near the window, barefoot on the cold wooden floor, watching the city lights shimmer like stars that had fallen too close to the ground. The wedding dress still hung in the corner, untouched since a ceremony that never happened, a white ghost of what could have been. She had thought the heartbreak would come in waves, loud, crashing, violent, but instead it arrived like fog, quiet, steady, unrelenting. Her phone rang. She stared at it for a moment before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Miss Montenegro?" The voice on the other end was formal, familiar in a way she had hoped never to hear again. "This is Richard Holloway, your mother's attorney." Aurora didn't breathe. "I'm calling to inform you," he continued, "that the terms of the estate have been finalized. As of today, the assets belonging to the late Maria Montenegro are legally yours." Aurora gripped the edge of the desk for support. "I don't want it," she said quietly. "I understand," Richard replied, not sounding surprised. "But it's yours, whether you claim it or not. The inheritance has been transferred." She thanked him and ended the call without another word. The silence returned, but now it carried the weight of old ghosts, of corridors filled with distant echoes, of a woman who once held Aurora's hand like it was delicate porcelain and guided her through a world made of rules and expectations. Her mother had never been cruel, but she had been relentless. Aurora remembered the piano lessons that lasted hours, the partial correction at dinner tables, the perfectly ironed uniforms, the books she had to memorize instead of enjoy. She remembered the days she came home, cheeks flushed with excitement, to say she wanted to be a writer, and how her mother had looked at her like she'd spoken blasphemy. "That's not a life," she had said coldly. "That's a fantasy." Aurora was 17 when she left. Her mother hadn't begged her to stay. She hadn't shouted or cried. She had simply handed her a check and said, "When you're ready to be serious about your future, this door will still be open." Aurora never cashed the check, never called back. Now, years later, the door her mother spoke had opened again, but only because she was no longer behind it. She crossed the room and pulled a box from her suitcase. Inside were a few old photographs and a single envelope with yellowed edges. She hadn't opened it. It had arrived a week after her mother's funeral, forwarded to a flower shop by an address she hadn't shared in years. Her name was written in her mother's handwriting. For weeks, she had stared at it, unable to tear it open, Tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the way the moonlight fell across the floor, or maybe it was a quiet ache in her chest that begged for something resembling closure. She opened it. "My dearest Aurora," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I know I was never the mother you needed me to be." Aurora's fingers trembled. "I raised you to be strong, to be perfect, because I thought that was love. I didn't know how to show warmth. I was taught that vulnerability was weakness. But watching you walk away that night, with your eyes full of fire, made me realize something I never admitted before. You were braver than I ever had the courage to be." Tears blurred her vision. "I was wrong, about many things, but most of all about love. I hope you found it. I hope you held on to it when I never could. And I hope one day you forgive me, not for what I said, but for what I didn't say." Aurora pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Her mother's voice, once so sharp, now sounded like a memory softened by distance. Still flawed, still imperfect, but no longer the villain she had painted in her mind. Across the city, Nicholas sat alone in his uncle's study. The room smelled of mahogany and old cigars. Portraits of Delgado ancestors lined the walls. Men who had built legacies from steel and politics. Men who were praised for their ambition and feared for their cruelty. Nicholas had grown up trying to fit himself into those frames, hoping one day his picture would hang beside theirs. But tonight, he felt like a stranger here. His uncle, Rafael Delgado, poured himself a drink and stared at Nicholas over the rim of the glass. "You made a spectacle of yourself," Rafael said, not angrily, but with cold disappointment. "At the altar, no less. What were you thinking?" Nicholas said nothing. "She didn't deserve that," Rafael continued. "Whatever lies you convince yourself of, that girl loved you." Nicholas looked down. "She lied about who she was." "Did she? Or did you just never ask?" Rafael leaned forward, voice low. "Let me tell you something, Nicholas. Pride will rot everything good in your life. You think love comes dressed in a certain package, with pedigree and approval? It doesn't. It comes quietly, sometimes in a flower shop, sometimes in a pair of eyes that see you when no one else does." Nicholas felt the words hit like stones. The image of Aurora standing in silence at the altar haunted him. She hadn't begged. She hadn't screamed. She had simply walked away, with more grace than he had ever shown her. "I thought she used me," he whispered. "No," Rafael said. "You used your fear to destroy something real." When Nicholas left that night, the city lights looked different. Less golden, more distant. Back in her hotel room, Aurora folded the letter and placed it back in the box. She sat by the window, pulling her knees to her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel angry at her mother, or Nicholas. She just felt tired of running. She watched the moon rise higher, calm and whole, and made a silent promise to herself. No more hiding, not from the past, not from the truth, and not from love, wherever it might still be waiting. The city had barely caught its breath. Whispers still swirled like wind through every corridor of high society. In salons and cafes, in boardrooms and dinner tables, there was only one subject that stirred more excitement than scandal: Aurora Montenegro. The girl left at the altar, the nobody from the flower shop who had vanished into the night and shattered the Delgado name like porcelain on marble. And yet, no one really knew who she was. Until the gala. It was the kind of night designed to impress. The Delgado Foundation's annual charity gala turned the coastal estate into a glowing world of crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a symphony quartet that played beneath the stars. Guests walked gardens trimmed like dreams and danced on glass floors above lit pools, sipping champagne like it was liquid status. Nicholas stood near the balcony, drink untouched, his thoughts heavier than the tuxedo he wore. Since that day, nothing had felt solid. Every handshake felt hollow. Every compliment a reminder of the truth he had tried to outrun. His mother kept glancing at him, lips pursed, while his father spoke in hushed tones with Rafael, who had reappeared in the Delgado circle as if summoned by fate. Even now, Nicholas couldn't quite read his uncle's expression. There was something measured in his gaze, like a man waiting for the final move of a game he already understood. Then came the sound. A distant thrum, low at first, like thunder caught in a dream. Conversations stuttered. Glasses froze midair. Heads turned upward as the light of the moon was eclipsed by a helicopter descending slowly into lawn beyond the garden gates. No one had been told of any aerial arrivals. The moment the blade stilled, a hush fell over the crowd, so complete that even the music faltered. The door opened. First came Raphael, calm, collected, familiar, but behind him, she stepped out like she had never belonged to the world they had once offered her. Aurora. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered like ocean waves, her hair pulled back in a style that framed her face with strength rather than softness. She walked with a kind of grace that couldn't be rehearsed, her eyes forward, shoulders steady, as though gravity no longer applied to her. There was no vengeance in her posture, no rage in her expression, just the kind of dignity that silenced rooms long before she ever spoke. Nicholas forgot to breathe. Gasps rippled through the crowd, murmurs rising like a swell. Someone whispered, "Is that?" "She's with Rafael Delgado." "No, he's her advisor now." "Didn't you hear?" "I thought she was just a florist." "She's not. She's Aurora Montenegro." The air. The word hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Heir. Not just to some forgotten fortune, but to Grupo Montenegro, an international conglomerate with holdings in Europe, South America, and Asia, one of the quiet empires of the financial world. And she was its sole heir. Nicholas felt the air shift around him. He remembered the afternoons in the flower shop, the way she laughed, the way she tucked petals into bundles like secrets only she could understand. He remembered how he had looked at her, and how he had never once asked what she had left behind to create that quiet life. He had never imagined she came from something far greater than the Delgado name. Aurora entered the garden with Raphael by her side. Their presence wasn't dramatic. It was composed, deliberate. She didn't scan the crowd for validation. She didn't falter when eyes met hers. She simply walked forward, as though she had always known she'd return. When her eyes finally met Nicholas's, it wasn't with accusation. It wasn't even sadness. It was something he hadn't expected, clarity. She stopped a few feet from him, her voice warm and steady. "Good evening, Nicholas." He swallowed hard. "Aurora?" She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't come here to cause a scene, or to return what was taken. I came because I think we need to talk." A flicker of discomfort passed through his father's eyes. His mother took a breath that never quite became a sigh. Even the guests, though silent, leaned inward with hungry curiosity. Nicholas stepped forward, voice tight with disbelief. "You're the heir?" "I always was," she said softly. "But I chose to be quiet about it. I wanted to build something real, something mine. And the flower shop, it was the first place I ever felt free." He looked away, the weight of his mistake crashing against him with more force than the shame of the wedding. "You could have told me." She nodded, lips forming a faint smile. "And you could have asked." There was no venom in her voice, no theatrical wound, just the truth, offered without expectation. She turned to Raphael, who gave a subtle nod before stepping back, granting them space. The garden no longer shimmered like before. Or maybe it did, but Nicholas couldn't see past her, past a woman who had chosen love over legacy, only to be discarded because he hadn't believed she was enough without a name. And now, with that name more powerful than his own, she stood before him not to gloat, but to give him one final chance at honesty. "Aurora," he said, voice raw, "I didn't know how to handle what I felt. I convinced myself you were lying, because the truth scared me." "I know," she said gently, "but fear does excuse cruelty." He closed his eyes. "I was wrong." When he opened them again, she was still watching him. Not like the girl at the altar, but like the woman who had risen from the ashes with more light than he ever deserved. She extended a hand, not to touch, but to invite. "Walk with me?" He hesitated, then nodded, and as they disappeared in the garden, side by side beneath strings of golden lights, the whispers faded into the background. Aurora had returned, not to reclaim what she had lost, but to decide, on her own terms, what came next. The moon was high, when they left the noise of the party behind. Aurora led Nicholas through the back path of the Delgado Estate Gardens. Quiet now, save for the whisper of the breeze between the cypress trees and the distant hum of violins still playing for a crowd that no longer mattered. The path was familiar to him, etched in old memories and reckless promises. He had walked it many times back when he was younger and bolder, when he believed that love could exist outside of bloodlines and bank statements, when he believed in her. She stopped by a small stone bench surrounded by wild roses. It hadn't changed, not even after all these years. It was here he once whispered to her, under a blanket of stars, "Love will always be worth more than money." At the time, it had felt like a vow, a defiance of the world that weighed on his shoulders. Tonight, those words returned like ghosts. Aurora turned to him slowly. Her eyes weren't cold, but they were steady, the kind that could look through the layers a person wore and find what remained underneath. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she let the silence settle between them, like the space after thunder, charged and aching. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but unwavering. Nicholas swallowed, throat dry. "I remember. You said love mattered more than status, that you'd give up everything if it meant living a life that was real." "I meant it," he said, though the words felt small now. "Then what happened, Nicholas?" Her voice cracked slightly, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it was almost tender. "When did the weight of your last name become more valuable than the truth we built together?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he had no defense, only shame. "I was afraid," he said finally, "afraid of losing the future they planned for me, afraid of what they'd say. I thought if I walked away from you, everything would fall back into place." Her smile was sad. "And did it?" He looked away, jaw clenched. "No." Aurora sat on the bench, smoothing the fabric of her gown with a kind of grace that came from strength, not upbringing. She glanced at the roses, then back at him. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. That surprised him. "I thought you came back to make a statement," he admitted. "I did, but not the one you expect." She reached into a small clutch at her side and pulled out a folded document, holding it loosely in her hands. "Not offering it, not yet. I've been given access to the full inheritance. It's enough to buy cities, Nicholas. Enough to become the woman they always tried to force me to be. But that's not what I want." He frowned. "Then what do you want?" She lifted her gaze, and something in her eyes sparked like fire. "Not wrath, but purpose. I want to use it to build something that actually matters. I've already spoken with Raphael. I'm creating a foundation, a real one, not for tax breaks or PR. I want to fund emotional support centers across the country, places where people can go when the world feels too heavy, places that offer more than silence or pills. I want to build something that saves people from becoming what we almost became." Nicholas blinked. The idea wasn't what he'd expected, and yet it fit her perfectly. "I don't understand," he said, voice low. "Why involve me?" She studied him, eyes searching. "Because somewhere beneath all the fear and pressure, I believe the man I once loved still exists. And because I need someone who understands both worlds. Someone who knows how it feels to be torn between expectation and heart." He stared at her, stunned. "You still believe in me?" he asked, disbelieving. "After everything?" Aurora looked away for a moment, as if steadying her breath, then turned back to him. "Because even when they humiliated me," she whispered, "even when I stood alone in that church and felt the world collapse around me, I still believed in the man you could be." Her voice cracked, but she didn't flinch. "That belief isn't blind, Nicholas. It's painful, but it's real. And tonight, I'm offering you something. Not to clear your conscience, but to give you a chance to choose who you want to be." His chest tightened. The air around him felt heavier now, laced with meaning. He felt the pressure of his family's legacy, the echo of his father's disdain, the memory of his mother's cold eyes. And then he looked at Aurora, the woman he once abandoned for a life that tasted like ash. Tears welled in his eyes before he could stop them. He turned away, ashamed. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Maybe not, she said gently. But this isn't about deserving. It's about deciding. The words hit deeper than any accusation ever could. He sat beside her, shoulders trembling. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. For the first time in years, Nicholas didn't feel like a Delgado. He didn't feel like a brand or a legacy. He felt like a man, naked, broken, and finally honest. He turned to her, eyes red, and nodded slowly. Tell me what you need. I'll help. Not for redemption, but because I want to believe in that version of me too. Aurora reached out, resting her hand over his, not possessive, not romantic, just human, solid, forgiving. Then let's build something new, she said softly, not from power, but from fire. And in that quiet corner of the garden, where once they spoke of dreams that never came true, something far greater took root, a beginning, not of love reborn, but of souls choosing to rise together from the ashes. Months had passed since Aurora and Nicholas stood beneath the sky that night, the air filled with a quiet hum of new beginnings. The Northern Light Center, a sanctuary of hope and healing, was now alive with the laughter and tears of those seeking solace. Aurora had poured her heart and fortune into this place, not as a monument to her wealth, but as a testament to the strength she found within herself. Nicholas moved among the small groups gathered in the garden, his steps lighter than they had been in years. The pride that once weighed on his shoulders had softened into a humility that surprised even him. Volunteering at the center wasn't something he had ever imagined. But here, amid stories of struggle and courage, he found a new purpose that no amount of money could buy. His eyes met Aurora's from across the room. There was a quiet understanding between them, a fragile thread woven through months of shared work, stolen smiles, and moments that spoke louder than words. The past still lingered in the spaces between them, but now it felt less like a chasm and more like a bridge. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the garden, Nicholas found himself beside Aurora near the old oak tree, where he had once declared that love was worth more than gold. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. I'm not the same man I was, Nicholas said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. But even if I've changed, my feelings haven't. I still love you, Aurora. I always have. Aurora's eyes shimmered with tears she didn't bother to hide. I had to lose everything to understand what truly mattered, she replied, her voice steady and full of warmth. And even when I had it all, it was still you I loved. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had never been apart. The moon began to rise, casting a silver glow that wrapped around them like a promise. Under that same sky that once witnessed heartbreak, they now stood whole, two souls healed, ready to face whatever came next together. Love, they realized, wasn't about riches or status. It was about courage, forgiveness, and the willingness to see each other through the cracks. And in that quiet moment, with the world holding its breath, Aurora and Nicholas began a new chapter, not as broken pieces, but as a beautiful whole.